Good evening. Welcome to another episode. This episode's about the mindset of poverty, particularly within the Muslim communities. I have a financial guru with me today. His name's Brother Hussein, and he's known to give advice widely as far as communities and further afield about how to develop a financial mindset, how to become prosperous. And he's fortunately agreed to come on to give advice to the wider community and the wider Muslim community. So thank you very much for coming on, Brother Hussein. I do think we are in some kind of a rut. And inshallah, through this episode, I think our viewers, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, will understand the gravity of the problem within our existing Muslim communities and how we can overcome them collectively. Just before we do start, I'd like to thank my main sponsor, Ahyan Estate. If you have a property or you're looking for a property, reach out to them. They're safe, they're trustworthy and reliable, and they'll give you the best prices. Also, if you're going through or you need mediation, reach out to Simplex Coaching. They can assist you and facilitate in that matter. Right. Without further ado, Brother Hussein, thank you for coming on. So this is quite a nuanced topic, the mindset, the poverty mindset. And obviously there's various YouTube episodes out there or on various platforms talking about how to become rich, get rich quick. And you've got the likes of Andrew Tate saying, stop being a loser, stop spending your money, drive a Rolls Royce or a Ferrari, whatever it may be, right? Put that to a side. I've on a number of my episodes, I've spoke about, let's be realistic and understand yourself and what your capacity is.
For sure.
But this is not to target out any individuals. This is more collectively.
Yeah.
It's more of a unity thing. How can we all grow out of poverty if we are in poverty? So the platform is yours now. Talk about the mindset of poverty and what you've learned so far and what you've done so far.
Well, firstly, to begin, when we look at the data doesn't lie. So looking at the data tells us about the Muslim community. Muslim households tend to have a lower income compared to other groups. Muslim households tend to experience poverty more than other groups. When there tends to be more child poverty within Muslim households. There's a lower proportion of Muslims with degree level qualifications compared to most other groups. And there's a higher proportion of Muslims with no qualifications compared to other groups. Okay, Muslims there tends to be a higher rate of unemployment within the Muslim community.
Is that across the UK or just Southeast or?
This is across the UK. This is from the UK Census data.
Okay.
And when you look at social mobility over the last decade or so, the Muslim community hasn't progressed in line with the general population. And then you have to ask why. Why are we essentially falling behind? You have to ask that question. You have to look inward and ask, why? There has to be a reason. And I think it's difficult to pinpoint one particular reason. I don't think there's a single contributing factor, but I personally believe that one issue that I think is holding us back is that poverty mindset. And just to be clear, there's a difference between being in poverty and the poverty mindset. Now, being in poverty is largely circumstantial. You don't choose which family you're born into. You don't choose who your parents are. You don't choose which country you're born in. And ultimately, rizq comes from Allah.
Yeah.
Even the prophets, alayhim salam, they experienced poverty. So poverty isn't something that somebody in poverty should be ashamed of. It's not something that we should kind of look down on, kind of ridicule. In fact, our faith, teaches us to support those in poverty. For example, things like zakat. But that's different from a poverty mindset. Okay, somebody could be rich, they could have money, they could have wealth, and still have that poverty mindset. We've heard, people, I'm sure, your viewers have come across numerous stories where, for example, somebody wins the lottery and after a while they've kind of blown it all away. Or athletes where they've earned millions and then later on in life, they're bankrupt. How does that happen? It's, I believe, that poverty mindset.
You probably have read The Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I think, I forgot what his exact name is, but he actually...
I think Robert Kiyosaki or something like that.
Robert, yep. So let's call him Robert. So I think his book is very insightful, and I can see patterns in what he espouses and what we do generally as a population. So if you were to summarize what the poverty mindset is, and we're going to discuss this anyway, briefly in a sentence, what would it be?
So I think the poverty mindset is essentially a system of thinking or holding certain beliefs and biases which kind of play into your decision making, and then you make in a negative way, and then that leads to actions which don't help you economically, financially. In fact, it does the opposite. And these action and that thinking, which results in these actions, is essentially holding you back from kind of getting out of poverty. I was watching something recently, and it was an American show, and somebody said you can take the guy out of the hood, but you can't take the hood out of the guy. It's that mindset essentially that's holding you back.
Let's sort of make it more granular. So the metrics. So in terms of finances, the money that one earns.
Yeah,
For argument's sake, what's the average income across the UK? Maybe 35,000?
something around that.
Around that.
Around that.
Let's make it more precise now. In London, I think it's about 40.
Okay.
Around 40, give or take. So someone that's an adult on £40,000 a year that lives in a council estate or is emerged from a council estate, talk me through their mindset when you allude to poverty mindset. So they're not earning a great deal of money, but what is it that their behaviors and actions dictate in order for them to stay languished in the poverty mindset?
Okay. So again, just to clarify, I think poverty mindset isn't correlated with how much you earn.
Okay.
Like I said, you could earn a lot of money and still have that poverty mindset.
Sure.
In terms of, trying to, I guess, understand somebody with a poverty mindset, if you look at their traits, so one trait is they tend to have this belief that, other people's actions kind of oversee theirs. Essentially kind of like a victim mentality. It's not my problem. It's not my problem I don't have a degree for whatever reason. It's not my problem that, I don't have a good job. It's not my problem, or it's not my fault that I can't progress in my career. There's always an excuse. You can always, blame somebody else. And it's easy to blame somebody else as opposed to kind of looking inwards and saying, actually, I didn't try hard enough, for example, or I missed about in school. As a result, I wasn't able to kind of like get the grades I needed to go into college and uni, etc. Or, for example, I didn't do well in an interview. That's why I didn't get the job. Or at work, there's somebody actually who's doing better than me, and that's why I'm not progressing. Somebody else got the promotion. So it's kind of like having that victim mentality, like always me. It's always somebody else's fault.
So a loser mindset.
If you want to call it that,
That's what everyone is calling it.
Yeah.
I would agree with you to some extent, because I think a person that does say, let's put a degree to a side.
Yeah.
Because I think most kids nowadays or young adults do have degrees.
Stats say otherwise.
Do they?
Yeah.
What, within the Muslim community?
Yeah.
The diaspora?
Yeah.
The amount of, I think when I went to university, how many years ago was this now? Maybe coming up to about 10 years ago. Most of my friends didn't go to university, but if you look at the 18, 19, 20-year-olds now, most of them are going to university. So empirically, I'm seeing otherwise.
Yeah. It is getting better. We are seeing, in terms of Muslims advancing within education, etc., getting more qualifications. I think we're improving. But it's still a majority of Muslims.
So with that sort of victim, and I use the loser mindset because I think all of those things, there is this, it's more of a, what's one of those buzzwords? Oh, he's a loser, don't be a loser.
Yeah.
And all these multimillionaires come out and say, don't have this mindset. But I do empathize with those that say there aren't any opportunities. And that is true also as well. I understand one not having the endeavor to succeed for himself or for herself, but there is that factor where there aren't any opportunities. And because of those opportunities, they have that mindset because they may have tried and there aren't good jobs out there, or there aren't opportunities, so to speak, as there is for a person that lives in, I don't know, the suburbs, or has parents that are doing well and nepotism comes into play.
I mean, I agree that all of these things are true to a certain extent.
Okay.
Somebody from a more better, well-off background will have better opportunities, but I definitely don't agree that, there isn't enough opportunities. I think the opportunities are there. And if you think about it, we're very lucky to be born at a time. We were born at this point in time. At a point in time when we have the greatest level of access to better healthcare, we're living longer, better access to education, we're more educated than kind of the general literacy rate amongst people is way much more better than, say, 100 years ago. And probably the biggest factor which could kind of help somebody progress is how easy it is to access information, the internet, for example. We've got all of that at our fingertips. You can, sitting right now, you can study about nuclear physics or something like that on your phone. Like, you've got 5 minutes. You can understand basic concepts or just to get a summary of how that works. So I don't believe there's not enough opportunity. I think a lot of it is to do with mindset.
So apathy.
Are you trying enough?
Apathy.
Yeah. really and truly, if you want something bad enough, you're gonna have to work for it. That's
But
that's
how
the
do you-
reality.
how do you? The thing is, and this is a psychological question here. How does one instill that thirst and hunger into a person that doesn't even know it exists or is aware of it? And I think that's the key concern here.
Yeah.
If, for argument's sake, I was fortunate enough to go to university, well, I wasn't, because you pay your student loans and it's a scam.
Yeah.
But those that didn't go to university, and it's not all,
Yeah.
but I think you can generalize and say they generally wouldn't have the ability to think abstractly.
Okay.
They think linear.
Yeah.
So if a person didn't go to university and he saved the £30,000 fee in this day and age, or perhaps even more, his bank balance would be higher anyway because he's not paying a loan, but he's blocked off that
progression. Yeah.
Not just progression, but just the idea of wanting to learn or has the capacity to learn. Because you've just told me you can sit there now and study nuclear physics. Nuclear physics isn't within his circumference. It doesn't even exist in his head, if you use that example. So that mentality you're saying is associated to the poverty mentality. Is that what you're saying? If we tie it into education.
Yeah. Like you mentioned in your example, somebody who didn't go education. So I mean, if you're somebody who hasn't gone into education, you can, I guess 2 ways to look about it. Now, you have to make a living. How do you make a living? You can find a kind of like typical job that's available to somebody with your level of qualification, or you can skill up. So it's, for some people, they're like, okay, I didn't go university. These are the only opportunities that are available to me. And bear in mind, there's probably going to be more people that are going for those kind of roles. So you're at a disadvantage there. Whereas if you made the decision to, level up, to skill up, just because you didn't go uni, you can do other things. There's, degree apprenticeships, for example. There's so many other things that are available. And a lot of these things you can study for free even. So ultimately, for me, again, at that point, it comes back to mindset. What do you want to do? Like, all right, you're down a bad road. Do you continue going that? Or do you say, actually, you know what, I'm going to turn around. I'm going to try a different route.
Tell me from your experiences within your Muslim community, through your observations, what have you seen?
A lot of that mindset that,
What, give up?
give up, like a defeatist attitude. I'm not going to go for this job probably because there's somebody better qualified out there, or because I'm not going to get it, or probably, I'm not going to get it because of the color of my skin. That kind of, you've essentially given up before you even started. And that, going back to the victim mentality, because of my background, because of my upbringing, I've kind of been set up to fail. So I'm just kind of like, doing what I can right now. Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is to do with you're holding yourself back as opposed to opportunities and trying to, I guess, progress yourself, so taking that initiative.
So there's two hypotheses I want to present to you, and I'm not endorsing this. I'm just presenting it to you. The first hypothesis is this victim mindset that one has or possesses. It's inherent in him or her. That's what they were destined to be. They were fixed with those abilities and they were destined to be at that position they're on. And the other one is that it's a generational thing and it's been passed down through generations. And an obvious example of that is his or her mother and father were immigrants. So they came to this country barely speaking any English. That had a knock-on effect on them when they went to school. There was no supervision or observation about them doing their homework or any emphasis put on school and homework. So the kid or the child, instead of focusing on education, looks for recreational things and hangs around with their mate 24/7. And then that culminates to them not having a good education and subsequently getting a good job. So those two hypotheses, one is inherent and the other one, it's circumstantial. Which of the two would you agree with? Or is it both?
I don't believe it's inherent at all.
Okay.
I think a lot of it, your second point about kind of that generational, I guess, poverty or coming from that kind of mindset, I think that's true. If we think about it, at least, I think looking at the Bengali community, and I say that because I'm Bengali, I come from that community. Our parents are, mostly migrants. They came from Bangladesh, and most Bengalis come from the Sylhet region within Bangladesh. And what is the Sylhet region made up of? What do you find there? A lot of agriculture. So most likely, our dads, their dads, the forefathers, etc. They come from essentially a line of kind of farmers. So what would they know about, I guess, wealth? They're essentially living day to day, and that the traits you pick up, kind of being in that line of work, and really and truly hard labor. A lot of the times, it's the poor class that do hard labor. It's the rich or probably the middle class that do administration and the rich class that, own businesses and things like that. So if you look at your history, you come from a line of, to a certain extent, like poverty, and you have to acknowledge that. So how would your parents or how would my parents teach me about growing wealth? Kind of like, this is where you can do to kind of like skill up, or like strategies you can employ to essentially get ahead. They didn't know it themselves. So again, if the responsibility falls on you, like with trauma, if you've gone through a generational trauma, it takes one person to break out of that cycle. So ultimately, you have to make a decision, like
For the family.
For the family, yeah. Do you want to be that person, or do you want to just like continue as is and just say, this is my essentially bed, and that's what I'm going to lay in.
That's a very good point, actually. Moving on from that.
So just on that, I'll if I can, one example. And it's somebody I know, and if he watches this, I hope he'll forgive me for mentioning this. So he's a smart guy, but he's not academic. So he's not like a very studious type. So he's not so essentially going to uni was never on the cards. All right. I don't think he finished college, and then he went to work, and it was mainly retail. And then when kind of like Uber came about, he became an Uber driver. So he was doing that. Now, at some point, he decided that he wanted better for himself. He wanted more. So what he did was he took the initiative to learn about a particular software program. That industry is quite big. He taught himself essentially mostly self-study, got help from a few guys, but mostly self-study. Studying material was free, so it didn't really cost him anything. Watch YouTube videos, all these other things, using the internet to his benefit. You have to pay for an exam. He paid for their exam, and then he got the certificate, he got the qualification, which is essentially an entry-level qualification within that field. And now he's kind of like within in a job that's earning like 40K.
Wow.
And that's the start of his career, essentially. Even though, yes, maybe his career did start a little bit late. He's my age, 36. But he's at the start of his career. So not only has he kind of like, imagine that, shifting from a Uber driver to working in a software company, or that field. And he's at the bottom of his career, so there's a lot of scope for him to progress.
I'd argue that he would be. You need to separate him. He's a man with drive.
Yeah,
and he was able to think outside the box.
But where does that drive come? That's the mindset. He didn't have any. He didn't come from money. He didn't come from a lot of wealth or anything like that.
So you'd argue he didn't have the poverty mindset.
No, because he chose. He made a decision that actually, I don't want to be an Uber driver, and this is not to knock any Uber drivers or anything like that. But he decided that that's not my destination. Actually, that I want more for me. I want better in life.
So many of us that you're saying are in this mindset. Just touching on Uber, and I was speaking to a friend of mine maybe 3 weeks ago. So funny you mention it. And Uber, for a lot of ethnic minorities now. I mean, our fathers and uncles did Uber, because if you were to do Uber on a full-time basis, and this is anecdotal evidence, I haven't done Uber myself, you could make potentially, depending on the number of hours you do, evening, weekends, you're smart about it, you're savvy, you can potentially make £4,000 a month after tax without killing yourself. So around, give or take, £900 to £1,000 a week.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people that do Uber, in order to make £4,000 a month, that equates to, I think, about 70,000.
About 75K salary.
75K salary after tax.
Yeah.
How many people are earning 75K a year in salary per annum, if the average income is 40,000 in London? And bear in mind, there's other factors involved. You're an ethnic minority. You're from a working to lower class background. You're perhaps first and second generation. So I commend the people that actually go to Uber. And usually those people that do Uber, they have a plan.
Yeah.
So when you say that they're from a poverty mindset, I think they have. I personally believe they're not from a poverty mindset. They've been dealt the cards that they've been dealt, and Uber is a way out for them, and they can make £4,000 a month.
Yeah.
Whereas if they worked in the council or NHS or public sector or private sector, they're making half of that. So they're taking a leap of faith in order to do this and graft.
Yeah.
In order to go and do something better. That's what I've noticed from Uber drivers primarily.
Okay. So I would ask you firstly.
Sure.
Sorry, to answer one of your questions. If somebody's earning about 75K, I think that would put them in the top 10-15% income earners in the country.
Okay.
Not just in the Muslim community, I'm saying in the country.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's very good. And again, back to the example I gave, my friend wasn't in a poverty mindset, because he was he was doing Ubering.
Yeah.
Right. But ultimately, he decided that he wants more. So I just want to clarify. I've got nothing against Uber drivers. If that's what you want to do, you're happy doing it. You've got a plan. Great. Okay. That doesn't make you poor or anything like that. Doesn't mean you've got a poverty mindset. But I would question what you've mentioned, like somebody doing Uber earning £4,000 a month. From all the if you look at all the people who are doing Ubering, how many actually are earning that? Because from what I've understood from watching certain videos of actually I think there was a guy on TikTok went quite viral.
Some young kid.
Yeah. He was doing trying to earn something like 6 or 8K in a month.
Yeah.
And from what I saw, I commend him. Honestly, I rate him. That drive is great to see.
Yeah.
But he had to do a lot of hours.
Yeah.
So when you ask if somebody's doing Uber and earning 4,000 a month, they're earning 75K essentially on a 75K salary, and then somebody in the council, they're earning half of that. Yes, obviously the one is financially better than the other, but I would argue that in the council, you've got a higher ceiling.
True.
You've got a higher ceiling, and you're working 9 to 5, especially in this day and age when you're working from home. You've got all these other benefits as well. Working from home, you've got a really good pension. Council pensions are amazing.
Secure holidays.
All of that stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then that's your kind of entry level or bottom, if you will. You've got a ceiling. There's so much progression that you could do within the council if you if you have the right mindset, if you put in the effort. I've worked in the council and I've seen those that actually want to progress, and they have progressed, to those who've been there stuck in kind of dead end roles for years.
And that's the poverty mindset you're saying.
That's a poverty mindset. You have to put in the effort, and I'll say you have to do the work. And there's a beautiful incident from the time of our Prophet alayhi salam. So this was when he was in Medina. So imagine at that time, Medina is the Muslim state, and the Prophet is essentially the leader of that state. So this man came to the Prophet essentially begging. He didn't have anything. He asked him for money, for support. So this is kind of to put it in modern day context, that's like somebody going to the government seeking benefits. So he did that. And the Prophet asked him, alayhi salam, do you have anything of value at home? So he said, I've got a piece of cloth, this item, and a bowl. So he said, bring it to me. So he brought it to him, and then the Prophet asked, out in the open, who here is willing to buy these two items? Somebody said, I'll buy it for 1 dirham. The Prophet asked, is there anyone who's willing to pay 2 dirham? Somebody said, okay, I'll pay 2 dirham. So he got 2 dirham. The Prophet told him, all right, take 1 dirham and use that to buy food for your family. Yeah. With the other dirham, go and buy an axe, like the sharp blade part of the axe. So he did that, and the Prophet, got some a piece of wood and attached it. So he's got a full axe, and he said, go and cut firewood and then go sell it in the market, and then don't come back to me for 15 days. So he did that. He went cutting firewood, selling in the market, came back, and then he said, I did what you suggested, and now I've got 10 dirham. So when we look at that kind of story incident in detail, a beggar, and you think about it, all he had of value at home was a piece of cloth and a bowl. That's poverty. That's abject poverty. Prophet alayhi salam, he didn't just give him money. He could have given him money because he was essentially the head of the state. They were collecting zakat, etc., Baytul Mal. So, and this person was eligible, but the Prophet saw this is essentially a young man who has the ability to kind of earn for himself. So thinking about that, that saying that, give a man a fish and he feeds his family for a day, but teach a man to fish and then provides for his family for his whole lifetime. So that's what the Prophet alayhi salam said. And then another interesting thing is the comment the Prophet made that do this for 15 days. Don't come back to me in 15 days. So that's about 2 weeks. And modern kind of science and data kind of says it takes about 2 weeks to form a habit. So it's not, he was thinking don't do it just for one day and it's hard, saying, oh, it's too hard, I'm not going to do it anymore, and give up. Continue, persevere. You have to grind, you have to put in the effort. And sorry, this one other thing, because this is something I'm quite fascinated about. In this, our Prophet ﷺ, he also gave us a bit of kind of a formula, if you will, in terms of how to allocate your money. You got 2 dirhams. The Prophet said, half spend on your family. So that's essentially kind of think about your necessities, food, stuff like that. Other half, he said, go and buy this, and then basically use it to earn money. So that's essentially the Prophet saying, invest in yourself. The Prophet, so this guy, he had nothing, and then from there, he got an axe. From there, he went and started kind of cutting firewood and selling in the market, earning money for himself. And now he's got that skill and he's got that mentality, and he can do it for the rest of his life.
Beautiful parable. And there's so many lessons we can draw from that. So you're saying we have something missing here, the empowerment, that we don't empower our communities to want better for themselves. And I want to go back to the Uber example. So when I see people doing Uber, I'm happy for them because ordinarily they probably would have been making 25 to 30,000 pounds. This allows them to make 60,000 pounds or whatever it may be, depending on however many hours you put in.
Yeah.
Almost like meritocracy. Yeah, what you're putting is what you get. But what's personally disappoints me is this: even you can sell anything to make money or do anything to make money, but we haven't advanced or developed because our forefathers, our fathers and uncles were doing this. Why is it that I see a lot of boys my age and even younger going to Uber for whatever reason?
Yeah.
I commend the reason, and I think go make your money. It's respectable, better than doing drug dealing. Halal, it's halal money.
Hello.
The biggest problem I have, and perhaps you can talk about this, is why are we not innovating? We're not reinventing the wheel. We're doing what our fathers and uncles have done and are still doing, right? Why are we still doing the same things they're doing? Why haven't we innovated? How is it that we've been brought up in this country, got some kind of education, forget getting a university education, the basic level education is GCSE, so you know how to read and write. Why is it that you're still doing what your father and uncle has done? And it's not like they enjoy doing Uber. They do it because it pays really good money. But why is it that we're not innovating? And just to not go off on a tangent, fried chicken shops and these, that it comes across as sophisticated, but it's like a glorified fried chicken shop. These burger shops you have, and they add this fusion to it. It's like you see one of your friends or cousins do it, and you think, oh, well, he's done it. Let me do another one. And if you drive across Tower Hamlets, East London, Walthamstow, Ilford, anywhere, all of the Muslim boys and girls, or Muslim boys in particular, that are opening up businesses, it's food shops that they're competing with each other. There is no innovation. That's all we're doing. And I get livid when I see it because is that all you're good for? It doesn't, with the greatest respect, a lot of these places make a killing and a fortune, but you can make money in anything. But it doesn't take more than half a brain cell to operate a food shop. And then on top of that, you talk about, when there's no growth within our communities and suppression, it's because we're trying to compete with each other for the same thing over and over and over again, and it's become more saturated. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. Tell me.
That's all right. I share the sentiment. I think one thing holding us back is, I think to a certain degree, we're still in survival mode. Our parents came here as immigrants, and they were in survival mode. They need, trying to make ends meet. And I don't think we've fully kind of come out of that. So even when we're making money, I mean, how are we using that money to benefit the community or to advance? We're not. So I think there's an element of that. There's an element of kind of investment back in the community. So for example, zakat. And I've spoken about this to you. National Zakat Foundation, they did some research, and they found 4 out of 5 Muslims give the zakat abroad. So if that money, and it's a huge amount of money, millions, hundreds of millions going out every year of the UK to other countries, why can't we use that money to benefit the community? Zakat, there's a purpose for zakat. It's supposed to help the community and those in need. There's another stat. I think every 12 minutes, a British Muslim applies to receive zakat. Every 12 minutes.
Wow.
So, on average.
Who's given that statistic?
National Zakat Foundation.
Every 12 minutes.
Every 12 minutes.
A Muslim asks for zakat fund.
Yeah. So by the time essentially we finish this podcast, 3 British Muslims have applied for zakat. And you have to remember the threshold for zakat, like in order to be eligible for zakat, is very low. And you don't so you have to be quite in a very bad state.
Destitute.
Yeah, to be eligible for zakat. So imagine that by the time we finished our podcast, 3 people have applied for zakat. Right. And that's really sad. That money, hundreds of millions, could be playing back to Muslims in the UK. So there's a lack of self-investment in that. I also think a lot of it is to do with, I think, education as well. I think the better education you get, the more skills you have, the more knowledge you have to do something better. And we're slowly starting to see more and more Muslims break into for example, the tech space, kind of venture capital investments, things like that. So we are seeing growth. It's just, I think, a lot slower rate compared to others and other groups. And again, coming back to our original point, a lot of that is to do with mindset. And it's sad because ultimately, being in poverty or being kind of not advancing puts you at a disadvantage. And that's not what our faith teaches. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that a strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah than a weak believer. But there's goodness in everybody. So first of all, there's goodness in everybody. This isn't to kind of like point out people or shame people, but the strong believer is preferred. Why? Because that strong believer, he can do more for the community, he can do more for the ummah. And strength isn't just in physical strength, it's also in mental strength and spiritual strength. Using your brains to do better for the Muslim community. And you look at our history in the heyday of the Muslim ummah, the rest of the world used to look to us for science, for education, for technology advancements, all of that. When Europe was going through their dark ages, their best and brightest used to come to places like Baghdad or Spain to learn. But now we've essentially fallen on the wayside.
You just concurred with my Uber Eats and the food shops. You're right. I think very, very valid points. I do think perhaps we won't cover it in this episode. I think we have a unity problem, and that comes from enmity and envy amongst ourselves. I think it's a disease.
That's another trait of that poverty mindset. You're jealous and envious of others because you can't have something for whatever reason, and you don't want to kind of look inwards and take an accountability. You see somebody else having that, you don't like that for them. But and even then, you kind of chalk that up to, oh, they're lucky. They're fortunate. They had this, they had that. That's why they're in that state. Of course, like given kind of where they come from, or given the fact that they came from a better background, they're going to earn more.
It's a very good point. Socioeconomically, if you look at Muslim ethnic minority in this country, most of us are from council backgrounds.
Yeah.
A few of our fathers did well within the restaurant trade, whatever trade, and they were fortunate, particularly if you look at the sort of Indian community, the Muslim Indian community anyway, and the Pakistani community. They came to this country and their parents somewhat invested in themselves and they moved out to the suburbs, which meant that they had the option to go to grammar schools and so on and so forth. With the Bangladeshi community at large, when our parents came here and our grandparents came here, there's little investment into moving out of a council flat or house, and everything was siphoned back home to build their empire there. And I think that has a massive impact
For sure.
for the generations to come. And I think there is a disparity between Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and Indians in terms of growth and where they are in the pecking order within the wider economy and society at large. And I think Bangladeshis and Silatis, precisely because I think they make up the majority of Bengalis in this country, are at the lowest in the pecking order. Talk about that, because you're from that community, aren't you?
Yeah. It's sad to say, unfortunately, in terms of stats around, data around kind of qualifications. So the proportion of Bangladeshi Muslims that have a degree level of education is lower in comparison to Pakistanis, and then that is lower in comparison to Indians.
Yep.
The Bangladeshi people tend to have, the Bangladeshi population tend to have a higher proportion of those without any qualifications. There tends to be all the kind of different stats I've mentioned, like household poverty, child poverty. There's more of that in Bangladeshi households, and it's really sad to see. Naturally, I come from a Bangladeshi background, Bangladeshi, so it's sad to see. But then you have to ask, why is that? And why is it that other kind of ethnic groups from that same continent, we're all from that sub-Indian kind of continent, why are others doing better than we are?
Is it because we're in our infancy with regards to how long we've been in this country, and a group has to go through this turmoil in order to go and really prosper? Is it that, or do you think this is much more acute and there's other problems that are factored in which perpetuate our problem?
So I do agree that a lot of it is to do with infancy and how long we've been here. So over time, naturally, I think we'll start to do better. I also think you can correct me, but I think there's a less importance given to kind of like reading and education. I think that's not to say that with the Bangladesh community they're against education or anything like that, but I think I've seen a lot in Pakistani, especially the Indian community. There's a greater push for education.
But I'd argue that the Indian community at large, I think the Bangladeshi and Pakistani community, roughly similar socioeconomic background, but the Indians, they usually live in the suburbs, the more affluent suburbs. And if we focus on Muslims and non-Muslim alike, because you've got to realize, and I think you told me this actually, the portion of Muslims that are actually Indian is actually 20%,
something like around that.
something around that. You
Yeah,
told me that.
yeah.
So I think the demographics matter and affluency matters, and they've been here a lot longer than we have,
Yeah.
Bangladeshis and Pakistanis. Also, I do think just on the reading matter, I think a very important point, and I'll share something from me actually. So whilst growing up, most of my friends and peers, like I said, from parents are immigrants, they didn't really care about I mean, they cared that we thrived and did well, because my father certainly didn't want me to do his job. Right. He wanted me to go and, that's why he came to this country, and he sacrificed in order for his kids and future generations to succeed. But one thing, what we did, because of this mindset, because they didn't care about our school, and they didn't really, not care wouldn't be the right word. They didn't have the capacity to understand. Yes, they gave importance to education, but because it wasn't enforced pragmatically, we had a free pass, and we didn't really care about education ourselves. So most of my friends and peers, and perhaps you can relate here, we didn't really read books growing up. We barely did our homeworks. And unfortunately, the school that I went to, I think at the time, 2004, we left, I think, the ATC GCSE rate was at about 30%, which is stark. Most of my peers and friends left school without English and maths as a GCSE. Now, being British born and not having English and maths, it's quite easy to say that that person is extremely thick. That would be the easier way out. But if you look at it in a more granular level, there's a lot of things that added up and culminated to that. From not wanting to be educated, more interested in going out and hanging around with his mates, not really interested in books. So he hasn't, or she hasn't, it's more than male, I think, hasn't developed his grammatical skills or his reading skills or his comprehension skills. And that has culminated into leaving with very poor skills, not really going to college, maybe going to college because it's the next thing to do, and not going to university. And I think that could be replicated, particularly across sort of the more impoverished boroughs like Tower Hamlets, Newham, parts of Ilford, and Redbridge, and so on and so forth. So I think it's important that, particularly our generation, there is a lost generation where we, I think, are the last generation that didn't give emphasis to education. Alhamdulillah, I think the younger generations that are growing up, they're giving a lot more importance to school, and they're getting the A stars and GCSEs, and they're the ones that go into Oxford and Cambridge and Russell Group universities. So I do think it's there, but there is a portion of them. So if there was within the 100%, I think 50% are flying.
Yeah.
Within the ethnic minorities, if you look at the Muslim community, and the other 50%, whether it's through capacity or mindset, they either turn to illicit things, or they have the mindset is I'm going to get 2 or 3, 4 jobs, amass a certain amount of wealth, and then open a business. So that's how I've sort of segmented it. Would you agree or disagree? No? I said 50%.
Yeah, 50. I don't know if you can say 50-50, but I agree that, in terms of the education rates, it's improving. But that side, the other side of that coin, if you will, who aren't kind of going to uni, etc. What my concern is, what's happening to them? And the thing is, you don't have to fall on the wayside. And that's my whole point. My point of contention here is not to kind of like shame, pick on, and like people, you're poor, etc.
No.
It's you have the skills, alhamdulillah, you've got your health, you've got your brain. Now with these two things, and the fact that you're born in probably the best time, in human history in terms of kind of advancement, and you don't use what's available to you in terms of the internet and everything that's at your fingertip, like you've got the recipe for success is there. But I think in a lot of time, what's holding you back is that mindset. Again, going back to that kind of keyword, that buzzword, the mindset. Whether it's you feel like there's a lack of self-worth, or you feel like you're not good enough, that kind of imposter syndrome, etc. And what I try and tell people is you are good enough, especially thinking about the from a Muslim point of view. Allah says in the Quran, "Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas," that you're the best nation that's been brought forward. So you've been given that status, and what are you doing with it?
Key action plans then, in terms of empowerment within our communities. What do you think leaders within a community, or people that do have initiative and want to take a leadership role, what needs to be done in communities in order to empower us? And also, another very important question is, when is the cutoff? Because if a 30-year-old is still having this imposter syndrome, apathy, loser mindset, is he beyond help at that point? I think at 18 or 19 or 20, and even in their early 20s, when they're trying to find themselves and stuff like that, or is it any age you can empower and help people?
Any age. It's never too late. It's never too late to learn. It's never too late to essentially try and turn your life around. But again, you have to want it. Nobody else is going to make it happen for you. You're going to have to want it, and you're going to have to put in the effort. I think even on this, there's a similar kind of hadith where, even if you think like the day of judgment is upon you, plant a seed. Still, you still do the effort. You put in the effort. So anybody can change at any time. Again, you have to. And in terms of what can the community do, firstly, invest in the community. And
how do we invest?
So firstly, I would say zakat. My personal belief is give zakat locally. And when it
locally to whom?
Trusted organizations. There are many trusted organizations. For me, one trusted organization is National Zakat Center.
Right.
That's the one. National Zakat Foundation. That's the one I've mentioned. That's the one I typically use. And Alhamdulillah, we are a very charitable community. That's recognized. The data is
all
there.
Our communities are very charitable.
We give millions in charity, and that's not just zakat. A lot of it is sadaqah. So my view is give zakat locally to your Muslim brothers and sisters who need it within the UK, so that we can kind of like advance as a community, and we can support those most in need. And when it comes to sadaqah, give that abroad. So that's one way of investing in the community. Another way is invest in your local institutes, like educational institutes, Islamic primary schools, secondary schools, things like that. And then lastly, I think is we need better role models. So if you're doing well for yourself, quite well off, you're quite successful, think about how you can give up your time and your knowledge, mentor someone from the community. And it might be difficult for you to just kind of go around and pick someone off the street. Start with, people within your circle. It might actually be your friend. Start with them. Start with family, cousins. Cousins of friends. If you've got that knowledge, if you've got that expertise, share that within the community. Why are you hoarding it?
Beautifully put. Any final words? We touched the surface on socio-economic upbringing. And you clearly said it's not the lack of opportunity. We're sort of in an unprecedented, once in a life situation where everything is at the touch of your fingers, literally. And if you want it, the world's for the taking. And that's the sort of capitalist ideology out there. And I don't want to put a stinker to your message here, but I am of the belief that, you have to take risks, and you put the endeavor in, the proverb of tying your camel, and then, all outcomes are with Allah. I think 2 or 3 crucial points. I think the zakah thing is very important, and I think what you did is, if you just stopped on zakah and say give your zakah in this country, as opposed to, because a lot of people abroad rely on our zakah.
Sure.
So if you then offset that with sadaqah, that's fine. I think it's very important. I think charity should start at home, and by extension your neighbor. And if you can grow as a community, I think one of the things, and I mentioned the Gujarati community, they're doing really well. The Gujarati community, and I think a lot of people speak about them from outside communities, that yes, they collectively grow together, and they've got houses here and houses there, but put the financial, but they're doing really well. The Gujarati community is doing well. Amongst the sub-Indian continent communities, they're doing really well, and they do it because they work in unison and in unity. In terms of, I think perhaps I'll have you back, or I'll have you back with other people, finding local institutions, Muslim institutions. I can't, even within Tower Hamlets, I can't see anyone that can help, unless it's for youth, the kids. For adults, aside from the governmental institutions out there. So, you've got, one of them would be the apprenticeship route. I'm sure London Borough of Tower Hamlets, alongside Newham, all these boroughs, they have initiatives in place to help those find some lever to move up within the community. But I think the biggest thing, and we're not going to talk about this here, is our sort of household setup. We are still living in overcrowded houses.
Yeah.
And that has a dampener on your mindset.
It does.
And your ability to move up in life.
Studies show that poverty actually affects brain development. So imagine that. from a young age, a baby growing up in poverty, it affects your actual development as a person. So of course it's a huge
But
damper. It's a huge
the
damper.
thing is, the reason I mentioned that is that option for so many of us,
Yeah.
it can't be helped. There's house
You can't.
shortages.
You can't.
So, we need to circumvent or sort of around that. And your key message is empowerment. If you are doing well in life, give back to your society,
Yeah.
help those that you know. Is that enough? Will that be enough?
I don't know if it will be enough. I think that's a starting point.
Yeah.
I think we can't. All we can do is try, and you have to start somewhere. So, like you mentioned, I think empowerment, education, mindset. Like, all right, you're stuck in poverty. You're in poverty, or you come from poverty, or you're not in a great financial state. What can you do? What can you do to get out of it? So that's one side of the equation, and the other side of the equation is, I guess, what I mentioned: the role model, the positive role models, and kind of mentoring, supporting those that those that have should be supporting those that haven't. I think that's missing. And the thing is with wealth, and I think a lot of people, and that's actually another kind of trait of that positive poverty mindset, is they have a negative view of money. The whole concept is money's bad, money's the root of all evil. From an Islamic point of view, that's actually not true. Money is fitna, and fitna just means it's a trial, it's a tribulation. It's not good or bad. It's there to test you. How do you use that money? In a similar way, even the Quran, we're taught that our children are fitna. Doesn't mean they're bad. How can you say your children are bad?
You're right. Good point.
It's a fitna, and it's how you go on about it. But coming back to the earlier point I made in terms of the strong believer, an incident, again, this happened during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Muslims kind of first migrated to Medina. There was a well there, and the well was owned by a Jewish man, and then he used to charge exorbitant prices to Muslims to access that water. So one of the companions, Uthman ibn Affan, who was Prophet's son-in-law and later became the third Khalif, he bought that well, and he basically gave it to the Muslim community. So that well is, I believe, still around to this day. 1400 years, he used his money to give something back to the Muslim community, and the Muslim community benefited from that for hundreds, over 1,000 years. That's the mindset we should have. Like, what's our legacy going to be? Because you're not going to be able to take it with you to your grave. What are we leaving for the Muslim community? How do we ensure that the Muslim community can thrive after we're gone? And we can do that by leaving money, but we can also do that by leaving our teachings, our knowledge, our experiences, educate and empower the next generation. It might be that you're too far gone. I say too far gone in the sense that not that you can't be helped, but maybe it's too late in your life, say, to become like a millionaire or a multimillionaire or something like that. But you can instill the necessary skills and knowledge in your children, so maybe they can get there. Ultimately, it's what are you going to do to get yourself out of a situation that isn't so great?
Thank you,
You're stuck
Brother
in poverty,
Hussein.
and what do you do?
Yeah, thank you, Brother Hussein. I think you're on a noble mission, and I think this episode, to those that do watch it, will be very beneficial. And even if they're not within the poverty mindset, I think ultimately what you're emphasizing here is help your fellow brethren, your fellow sister, your community, and we grow together. This poverty mindset, and I think the census that happened in 2021 concurs that we as a Muslim community are far behind the general population. And I think it's definitely a cause for concern. There's various factors that we haven't covered, socioeconomic factors, more particularly or precisely households, the area we do live in, and it matters on parents and connections and networks. But ultimately, if I can summarize what this brother has said, I think if we become more selfless, yeah, that's the word, right? Selfless,
Yeah.
selfless, altruistic, and give back to our communities, whether it's young and old, whoever it may be. Essentially, Islam advocates this hugely. Help your Muslim brother, because not only by helping him do you help him and put a smile on his face and you benefit him, but you get immense reward because of it. So to those out there that are doing well, don't pull up the ladder, pull the ladder down. Help your own community, help your brothers, help your sisters, help everyone. Because if the community grows and flourishes, we are a population in this country, I believe, 4 or 5 million.
something like that.
something along those.
Yeah.
That's a substantial amount of people, and we've got all the resources out there. You know, you can say the government doesn't do anything, but really, all the resources. You know, education is free. There's loans, bursaries. You know, even if you haven't got a job, you're on the welfare state. So use your initiative and help your fellow brethren, your sister, your family, your community in whichever way you see fit. If you're in a high flying job and someone needs help with their CV, or they need help and advice in interview prep, or they need help in advice into going into engineering and you're an engineer, tell them the steps they need to take. The smallest of act of kindness and the smallest things can, if you compound it together, and if all of us develop that mentality, I think inshallah we'll go a long way. Thank you very much for watching. We've only touched on the poverty mindset. Inshallah, we'll explore that much further as the weeks and months progress with episodes. I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.